December 29, 2006. London. Inside the British Treasury, a clerk processes a routine payment. It has been made every year for 6 decades. The destination is the United States Treasury. The amount, $832 million. With that transaction, a file is closed. A debt that began in 1946 is finally paid. On paper, it looks like closure. In reality, it is the final line of an imperial obituary. Britain has just finished paying America back for the privilege of surviving World War II. The clerk doesn't know the full story. He doesn't know that the original loan was $3.75 billion, and that Britain has now paid over $7.5 billion in total. He doesn't know that before Britain ever received that loan, it had already liquidated $12 billion in overseas investments at fire sale prices to American buyers. He doesn't know that Britain surrendered $4 billion in gold, handed over strategic naval bases across the Caribbean, and dismantled the trading system that held its empire together. He doesn't know that when you total every asset sold, every base leased, every market surrendered, and every interest payment made between 1940 and 2006, the wealth transferred from Britain to the United States equals approximately $450 billion in today's money. For comparison, the Marshall Plan, celebrated as America's great act of generosity, cost about $200 billion in today's dollars. America extracted more wealth from Britain alone than it gave to all of Europe combined, and Britain was the ally. Britain was on the winning side. This is the story of how the United States didn't defeat the British Empire with armies. It acquired it through foreclosure. How Britain's military victory was converted into financial bankruptcy. How contracts signed under desperation transferred the wealth of the world's largest empire to a rising creditor nation. And how this same mechanism later became the standard operating procedure of the global debt system. To understand today's world, you have to understand how Britain fell, not on the battlefield, but on the balance sheet. In September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Britain still ruled a quarter of the planet. London was the center of global finance. The pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. Britain held $4 billion in gold, over $20 billion in overseas investments, and generated $500 million annually just from foreign income. Railways in Argentina, copper in Chile, industries in North America. But Britain had one fatal weakness. It imported more than it exported. Britain depended on foreign food and raw materials. Nearly 60% of its food came from overseas. Steel, oil, rubber, aluminum, all imported. War turned this vulnerability into an existential threat. German submarines targeted supply lines. Bombers destroyed ports. If imports stopped, Britain wouldn't just lose the war. It would starve. To survive, Britain needed massive supplies from the only nation capable of providing them, the United States. Tanks, aircraft, oil, steel, food, everything had to cross an ocean filled with submarines. But America was neutral. Congress had passed neutrality laws. Aid was forbidden. Supplies could only be sold under one condition: cash and carry. Britain had to pay immediately in gold or dollars and transport the goods itself. No credit, no loans. This was the trap. Britain needed billions, and Britain could only pay by liquidating itself. Between September 1939 and December 1940, Britain began bleeding wealth at an unprecedented scale. First came the gold. In a secret operation, billions in gold bars were loaded onto warships and shipped across the Atlantic, the largest physical transfer of wealth in history. Next came securities. British citizens were ordered to surrender American stocks and bonds. The government sold them on Wall Street, raising over $1 billion. Then came the most destructive sale of all: income-producing overseas assets. Railroads, factories, mines, sold quickly, cheaply, and permanently. These assets had funded Britain's trade deficit. Selling them meant Britain would be poor forever, not just during the war. By December 1940, the numbers no longer worked. The gold was gone. The securities were sold. The assets were nearly exhausted. Britain still needed billions in supplies it had already ordered and had no way to pay. Britain had reached mathematical bankruptcy. That's when Winston Churchill wrote to Franklin Roosevelt, not asking for generosity, admitting insolvency. December 8, 1940. Winston Churchill writes directly to Franklin Roosevelt. The letter describes the submarine war, the collapsing supply lines, the urgent need for destroyers and aircraft. But beneath the language of alliance is a blunt truth. Britain is broke. Cash and carry has drained the empire dry. Britain can no longer pay. Roosevelt understands the stakes. If Britain falls, Germany controls Europe. If Germany controls Europe, America is next. But Roosevelt faces a problem. U.S. law forbids loans to nations at war. The American public is deeply isolationist. Congress does not want to save the British Empire. Roosevelt needs a workaround, something that looks like business, not charity. The solution is Lend-Lease. Publicly, Roosevelt explains it with a homespun analogy. If your neighbor's house is on fire and you own a garden hose, you don't sell him the hose. You lend it, and he returns it later. Simple, generous, neighborly. Behind closed doors, it is nothing like that. This is not aid. It is foreclosure. The man running the negotiations is Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau Jr. Morgenthau is not sentimental. His position is ruthless and precise. Before America gives Britain anything, Britain must prove it has stripped itself of everything. Morgenthau demands a full audit of the British Empire. Every gold bar, every foreign investment, every factory, every private asset owned by British citizens. Britain is not treated as an ally. It is treated as a bankrupt corporation under receivership. The British are stunned. They argue they have already sold most of their gold. That liquidating long-term assets during wartime will force fire sale prices. That destroying income-producing investments will cripple Britain after victory. Morgenthau does not care. If Britain still owns assets, he argues, American taxpayers should not subsidize the war. One target becomes symbolic. American Viscose Corporation, the largest rayon producer in the United States. It is owned by Courtaulds, a British firm, and generates roughly $5 million a year in dividends flowing back to Britain, a vital stream of dollar income. Morgenthau points to it and says one word: sell. The British resist. Morgenthau issues an ultimatum: no sale, no Lend-Lease. Congress will kill it. Britain folds. On March 15, 1941, the British government seizes American Viscose and sells it to U.S. investment bankers. Everyone knows Britain is desperate. The bankers negotiate mercilessly. Sale price: $54 million. Estimated true value: over $100 million. Britain receives roughly half its worth. The proceeds go straight back to the U.S. Treasury to pay for weapons Britain has already ordered. This pattern repeats across dozens of assets. At the same time, another deal is cut. Britain is losing merchant ships faster than it can replace them. German submarines are strangling imports. Churchill begs Roosevelt for destroyers. The U.S. Navy has 50 old world-worn destroyers sitting in mothballs, slow, obsolete, of limited combat value. Roosevelt agrees to transfer them, but not for free. In exchange, the United States demands 99-year leases on British naval and air bases across the Atlantic: Newfoundland, Bermuda, the Bahamas, Jamaica, Trinidad, Antigua, British Guiana. A chain of bases encircling the Western Hemisphere. The strategic value is incalculable. What does Britain receive? 50 aging destroyers, many of which break down almost immediately. By March 1941, Britain has been systematically stripped. Gold shipped out. Overseas assets liquidated. Profitable companies sold at discounts. Strategic territory leased away. Only then does Congress pass the Lend-Lease Act. From 1941 to 1945, Britain receives $31 billion in aid. It keeps the nation alive. Without it, Britain would have starved by 1942. But the most destructive clause is buried deep in the agreement. Article 7. Article 7 requires Britain to eliminate discriminatory trade practices after the war. This is diplomatic language for one thing: the destruction of Imperial Preference, the tariff system that protected British industry within its empire. Imperial Preference was the economic backbone of the British Empire. It ensured that British goods were cheaper than American goods in imperial markets. Article 7 signs it away. Churchill knows what this means. British negotiators fight it. But the alternative is immediate starvation. Churchill overrides them. Britain signs. While Britain fights Germany with borrowed dollars, American corporations quietly expand into the markets Britain has abandoned. British factories produce only weapons. American factories produce weapons and consumer goods for the world. By the time Germany surrenders, the war is already lost, financially. And then, without warning, the final blow falls. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrenders. World War II is over. 7 days later, the United States terminates Lend-Lease. The cutoff is immediate. Total. No transition. No warning. American ships already en route to Britain, carrying food and fuel, are ordered to turn around mid-Atlantic. The dollars stop. The supplies stop. Britain's economy, re-engineered entirely for total war, freezes overnight. Factories produce weapons, not consumer goods. Britain still imports nearly half its food. Every calorie, every shipment, every barrel of oil had been financed by American credit. Without it, Britain is bankrupt in days. The shock in London is paralyzing. Britain's greatest economist, John Maynard Keynes, calculates the consequences with brutal clarity. Without immediate financing, food imports collapse, rations fall below subsistence, unemployment explodes, and social order breaks. Britain has one option: beg America for a loan. In September 1945, Keynes, already dying from heart disease, sails to Washington. He believes Britain has moral leverage. Britain fought alone for 2 years while America remained neutral. Britain bankrupted itself holding the line. Surely this sacrifice merits justice, not a loan, but a grant. He is wrong. The war is over. American voters are tired. Congress is hostile to Britain's new Labour government and its socialist reforms. Justice has no exchange rate in Washington. America offers a loan, $3.75 billion, barely enough to prevent starvation. And it comes with conditions designed to finish what the war began. The most lethal condition is sterling convertibility. During the war, Britain created the sterling area. Empire nations were paid in pounds, but forbidden to convert them into dollars. This forced them to hold sterling and buy British goods, protecting British industry. The loan requires Britain to abolish this system within 1 year. Keynes understands immediately. This is a death trap. The moment convertibility is introduced, every country will dump pounds for dollars. The loan will vanish in weeks. Britain's reserves will collapse. He fights it. He loses. In July 1946, Parliament accepts the loan. It is described as financial Munich, appeasement for survival. Keynes dies in April 1946. His heart gives out before he can watch the consequences unfold. On July 15, 1947, Britain makes the pound fully convertible. The result is instant and catastrophic. Countries rush to exchange sterling for dollars. India, Egypt, Australia, Argentina. In just 5 weeks, Britain loses $700 million, nearly 20% of the loan, for nothing. On August 20th, convertibility is suspended. The damage is permanent. Britain's weakness now reshapes global power. In February 1947, Britain informs Washington it can no longer support Greece and Turkey against Soviet pressure. America steps in. The Truman Doctrine is born. Britain's global role is officially over. In 1949, Britain devalues the pound by 30%. Overnight, the British population becomes 30% poorer relative to the world, but the debt remains. The Anglo-American loan is not forgiven. It carries interest. Over 60 years, $3.75 billion becomes $7.5 billion. Every year, regardless of crisis or prosperity, Britain pays. Final payment, December 29, 2006. Victory, paid for across generations. The divisible debt is only the surface. Between 1940 and 2006, Britain transfers an estimated $450 billion in today's money to the United States. Gold reserves liquidated, overseas investments sold, income streams lost, imperial markets dismantled, strategic bases leased for nearly a century. Who benefits? American investment banks that bought British assets at fire sale prices. American corporations that captured British markets while Britain was fighting for survival. The U.S. government, which acquired global military reach without conquest. And most importantly, the architects of Bretton Woods. In 1944, while Britain was still fighting Germany, negotiators met in New Hampshire to design the post-war financial order. America imposed a system that entrenched dollar dominance. The IMF and World Bank would sit in Washington. Voting power would favor the United States. Loans would come with conditions. Keynes proposed an alternative, a neutral international currency, the Bancor, that would prevent any nation from dominating the system. America rejected it. Britain had no leverage. What was done to Britain became policy. Since 1946, the IMF has imposed structural adjustment programs on over 80 countries. The pattern is identical. Crisis, loan, forced privatization, currency convertibility, asset sales, market opening. American institutions buy cheap. Local industry collapses. Debt becomes permanent. Mexico, Argentina, Indonesia, Greece, dozens more. Britain was not the exception. It was the template. Germany lost the war and was rebuilt with grants. Britain won the war and paid for 60 years. The empire wasn't conquered. It was repossessed. The mechanism hasn't changed. Only the names of the debtors. And once you see it everywhere.